Good evening, televiewers. You're welcome to Prime R, the first for this week. And in this edition of the program, we are going to be looking at Africa's democracy, asking the question whether it is making gains or regressing, using Guinea, Mali, and Chad as examples to discuss on our topic for tonight. We also are going to be looking at another topic which has to do with the Russian presence in Africa. Increasingly, we are feeling the presence of Russia. We are also asking the question whether Africa is going to be used, as well as the Middle East, as another playground for renewed Cold War between the East and the West. We are discussing these two topics with the panelists who are seated in the house already. Dr. Nick Ngwanyam is here with us. He is a politician, an educationist, and a social entrepreneur. Good evening and welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all Cameroonians and all the others listening to us from around the world. These are very exciting topics, and I would just pray that I have enough time to express myself, because the things we are going to be discussing today are very important to the renaissance of Cameroon and most African states. And I hope that I'll be able to get my message across. Thank you.
We also are in the company of Professor Mark Anthony. He is a Pan-Africanist. Good evening and welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Leo, and to my fellow panelists and to Cameroonians and Africans in general watching at us from wherever they are right now. We believe that Africa at a moment like this needs to go back to where it all came from. If we can't go back to the drawing board, we'll remain at the mercy of the West or the East. And that is what we do not want as Africans.
We also are in the company of Mr. Lucas Anji. He is a very active member of Cameroon Civil Society. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Leo. It's a pleasure to be on the panel today to discuss issues that would build our country and our continent. So I would call on the viewers to stay glued to their TV so that we together with them can say things which others will get from it, and possibly our states to equally take from it, and why not build our democracy and make it much better.
Andrin Atemibako is also a Pan-Africanist. He's in the studio with us. Good evening, Andrin, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. KUM LEONARD, and all the panelists who are in the house this evening. Special greetings to all Cameroonians, all program rather. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nick Ngwanyam, I'll start with you. Is Andy for online if it's there? Okay, it's not there. And Dr. Nick, I'll start with you. You are appraisal of what we call and live as democracy in Africa today.
Thank you very much. Democracy is a form of government that is foreign to us. It was introduced to Africa, and we are told that it's a government of the people, by the people, and it's a government that is put in place by the majority, following some mechanisms in which elections are key. But before we even get lost into what we are saying tonight, I just want to make some crazy statements to say that democracy is not what Africa needs now, and that democracy doesn't work when there is poverty and ignorance. Democracy doesn't work, and lies telling these things. And when you have elites who are very crafty, number one, there's poverty. Number two, there's ignorance, and number three, there is elites that are very crafty, and there's a lot of lies telling. When you have this combination, democracy doesn't work, and we need to use a different tool for governance. It's very important, and we have said here time and again that what Africa needs to be able to survive would be to put in leaders in the different steps of government, different strata of government, who are enlightened, benevolent, and despotic in their thinking. We'll find time to define all these words so that we see how it fits. It's very, very important. So what we are calling democracy in Africa doesn't work. It's a sham. And another thing to that I would like to say is that we say we've had independence. What we are calling independence is not independence. Watch my lips again. Africa is not independent. We are not independent. And another concept that I would like us to define tonight African countries have been using this word emergence, emergence, emergence. We know that Rwanda is on the road to emergence. Cameroon seeks to emerge by 2035. But if you go and hold most of our elites and professors and so on and ask them what is emergence, they will not tell you. It's key. If we don't understand what emergence is, if we don't understand what economic independence is, we are wasting our time. Everything turns around economics, turns around industry, and turns around technology. Thank you.
Professor Mark Anthony, I want to also have your appraisal of what is being practiced in Africa as democracy so far.
I want to say democracy is not a new thing to Africans. The only problem we have in Africa is what we call democracy that was imported from Europe. You see, before the white man came to Africa, we had governments which had a functioning mechanism. And if you remember, if we go back to look at how Africa was colonized, went back to 1884 when the Germans came to Cameroon and signed a treaty.
Germano-Douala Treaty?
With the Douala kings. They did not come when there was an empty land. They met kings and they signed an international treaty with these kings, which implies that there was a government in place. And this government could go into signing a treaty. What were they using? Was Africa just a jungle? Was it a land where there was anarchy? No. We had a well-structured government in Africa. And democracy was practiced in it, because democracy is not supposed to be defined as a government of the people, for the people, by the people. It is more of values. The values that make up that particular leadership style is what makes that democracy. So we are looking at democracy as a system where there is liberty, where people enjoy rights, some certain rights. The question is, do Africans have that? Yes, they did have it. And so when we look at what came after in 1960, when they said they gave us independence, like Dr. Nick said, I will repeat the statement. Africa never had independence because you are not given independence, you take independence. The United States, before they got their independence, they had a war of independence that they seized their independence from the British. But in Africa, we hear that we sign papers and say we have been given independence. You don't give independence to a person. That negotiation that was done was a means to maintain Africa in total dependence while they keep on exploiting Africa in the name of independence, or independent masters, or whatever they call themselves, colonial masters. And so, Mr. Leo, Africa does not have a problem of democracy. Africa has a problem of dependency. Africa has a problem of, in fact, they have been brainwashed. It goes back to push the point where he said ignorance. Africans had been brainwashed and positioned in a place where they believe wrongly about what they see in front of them. We get to believe more that Europe is the best place to be. If you look, do a sample of 100 young people today. They will tell you America and Europe is heaven, while Africa is hell. Why? That comes back to the economic position that Dr. Nick mentioned. Because if you look at it critically, what makes a nation strong is not the politics per se. It is the ability of the people to be able to have what they need per hour, per day, what they can eat, what they can take care of themselves with. That's economics. So we need economic stability and independence to be able to declare our political independence. And when that is lacking, we are nowhere to be found.
Mr. Lucas and G, we're talking about the state of democracy in Africa today. What should actually help guide where we are heading as far as our democracy is concerned? and what should be those stones on which our democracy should rise? Is it the tradition of Africa, the people of Africa, or is it the fact that we have misunderstood the Western concepts of democracy?
What we call democracy in Africa, I would rather look at it to be a business strategy that was given to a particular group of people for the interest of the entrepreneur who designs this strategy. For the fact that Africa has not yet had independence, I just want to say this: Africa has not yet had independence. We do not have independence in Africa. Those who went in for what we call independence of the countries negotiated, and something was given to them. And what was given to them is the right to exercise certain authority with foreign forces, which in most cases they have been transformed to local mercenaries with certain things in place, such as the physical arm, the firearm, to control the people. So that is the kind of democracy that was given to Africa, because what we see as democracy in Africa is a system which was handed on to us by the white man who decided to let us go without using the gun like they did before, and so they had to come behind now to give us the guns to use against ourselves. So we accepted what is being known as democracy in Africa without taking into consideration the sociological component of Africa. And until we get to put these things into perspective, it will be difficult for most African leaders to understand why what they call democracy is not functioning. It is the reason why, having tried this and it's not functioning, they have resorted to constitutional coup. And it is happening so because most of those whom they sent out, such as what I will call the elite agents, they could not negotiate well. And so they are hiding behind this. And so since it is an agenda which was forced down the throats of Africans, and unlike the most Western European countries, it was forced down to the European countries, and the European countries had to bring it to Africa so they can continue with their agreement. We should not forget, what we see today as democracy, especially in Africa, is the type of democracy which is being given to Africans by America. The democracy from the Western world is not the same democracy from America. And the kind of democracy from America is the democracy which is now conflicting with that which was given to most of these Africans on the day of their negotiations to take power from the Europeans and to rule their people. So with the conflict now of different countries coming in, the Europeans are now there, the Chinese are now present, the Americans are now present, it is difficult for that democracy which was initially given by most of these contractors to these leaders in Africa to function. So I think if we have to solve the problems we have in Africa, we should understand that the mindset and the society in which what was given to them is different from who we are. For example, if democracy were to be working very well, then I want to say that Europeans would have used democracy when they came to colonize Africa. They would have sampled the people's mind. But for the fact that it did not work, they had to use physical force. And having used physical force and they succeeded, and since the war was so much conscientized, and so they now saw it very difficult to continue with such force, they had to set in now what was called the European democracy. And that European democracy has kept Africa underdeveloped for long. So I would say that if we want to live and leap up from where we are today, we should abandon what is said to be the European democracy and not even the American democracy. We should go back and look at the institutions that were in place which helped in shaping and building Africa. Because before the coming of the European, like we are told, which of course I want to believe that Walter Rooney will not say a lie in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Dar es Salaam was already developed. We had well-structured streets which were not there as a result of democracy. They were there based on the institutions that were present in Africa. And these institutions did quite well. So, Mr. Coup, I would think that what we see today in Africa as democracy, I rather see contractors who have decided to subject their people and to underdevelop their continent. A vivid example, we can get this from China. China did not adopt what was supposed to be the Western democracy. And having tried that, they realized that Hong Kong itself, if they should leave what Western democracy is all about in Hong Kong, it will be difficult for China to actually consolidate the powers which Beijing has to develop China. Many other cities in China had been developed, but Hong Kong was still in the same way the British handed it over to the Chinese people in the late 1997. And so they had to look into that keenly to see what was happening, and they realized that the Western democracy, Mr. Coup, is a hindrance. So I think we should forget about what we call democracy. We should not forget Africa is not independent, and those who negotiated to manage Africa are business people. And so the business strategy that was given to them, other countries are conflicting it now. China, the Americans.
Well, we've had political parties in Africa for some time now, for decades. Today, Andrew ATEM Bako, we have had elections for decades, and we have had presidents, we've had presidents of political parties. How can we today say what we are practicing has not been democracy and that its place is not in Africa?
Well, Mr. Liu, I think that we have to understand the objectives, the goals, the initial plan when it concerns Africa and the West. When we look back behind our history, come to realize that our people are victims, our people have been abused, Africa has been heavily undermined, and Africa has been heavily, how will I call it, marginalized, and Africans have been stripped away from their dignity, from their honor, from their rights, and from their sovereignty. And these are the genealogies of the African problems which were caused by the Europeans who first came to Africa and saw the opportunities which could better their life and could develop their own nations. And they decided to maltreat and to take captive and to conquer Africa for their own interest. Even though some people would say that the Africans sold Africans, I think it's just that some of those people do not know history very well. When we talk about slaves, we talk about people who have been conquered in a war, and the remaining surviving ones are those that were taken out as slaves, and that is the genealogy of Africa. So if you look at the setup in Africa today, mentioning the political parties which you have just cited, you come to realize that it's, I think it just offers room for some kind of employment and some kind of distraction to the people, and to, how will I call it, to kill the power of the people. Because when you start admitted in the first instance that democracy is to give a freedom of expression, right to self-determination, we are talking about the power of the people. And then when you now come now and talk about political parties, that contradicts the idea of people having the power. Because when you talk about political power, that simply means that you have taken the power of the people by reducing them into minority groups. So that means that the people who get to vote in presidents in power are not the majority. Looking at our population, for example, a country like Zambia, you are talking of 2 million people, where 60% of its population is below 18 years, which are not eligible to vote. So how do we say that the masses have voted a president? It becomes very contradictory. We talk about Cameroon, below 25 years is 60%. So when you look at all the statistics of Africa, you come to wonder why people who do not believe in themselves, people who do not have, I mean, they do not have, how will I call it, that feeling of self-determination whereby you come to vote in people who are already above the age of retirement to lead people who have a whole future ahead of them and have everything to put forth to build their nation.
But who is voting them?
That is where the challenging question comes to, and that is why we are discussing about all of these political parties, because if you look at the population of Africa, many Africans do not understand that we have lost a lot of years of education. A lot of Africans, as I know, especially the Africans in the diaspora, they lost about 500 to 400 years of education where they were not allowed to study. And this also comes back to Africa. We have been kept away from education, and that's why you realize that it comes to the question you have asked. You come to realize the minds of a people who do not believe in themselves and feel that it is a man who is above retirement should lead them, when you should be able to master and to decide your own future. So you come to realize that our population is only reduced to compliance, why age commands respect, where the people believe that it is these old people who can take care of them, which is okay, but leadership, or a good sign of leadership, is not leading from ahead, it's leading from behind. Allow those whose future matters, allow those who can make a great input, who have a lot to contribute to their generation, allow them to decide their own future while you guide them from behind. And this is what we are saying, that these political parties, Mr. Liu, under the context of democracy, it's a strategy to kill the power of the people and to allow the people get into minority groups, so that those that are in control of the democracy can always get those that they want to be in power, using the division of the people and allowing them to vote in always the wrong leaders. And that is why you realize that with all the elections we've had in Africa, with all the political parties we had in Africa, we have not developed ourselves. We have been electing leaders, but we come to realize that the leaders we keep electing are people who do not reflect the demands of their people, who do not meet the demands of their own society, who do not come through the doors of the masses. And that is why we are saying that if we are going to emerge as a people, we need to stop all this division. We cannot build by being divided. We can only build when we come together. And that's why I cited also the case of China. China has the one-party system, where not everybody is giving the right to vote in the president of China. It's given to 2,890 something persons that are allowed to choose the president of China. So this is what we are talking about, that if we are going to survive, we need to redefine democracy. This is very important, because we need to know how it's going to adapt to our system, our culture, our beliefs, our religion. I mean, there are so many things we need to know. How extent are we going to allow democracy to be in Africa? We are not pushing everything away, but we are saying that let us be able to redefine which side of the coin we want to apply, because it's like a coin. When you move it to one place to another, you need to be able to adapt it, because it's not the same that is going to work in Cameroon, it's the same that is going to work in Ivory Coast. So let each of us decide what is going to work for our nation, and then we apply it to develop our nation. But if the whole entire of Africa is going to use one thing, which Europe does not use, which America does not use, which Asia does not use, democracy, Mr. Leo, was brought in when dictators wanted to transfer the power of dictatorship into a form of a system. That is why they saw in democracy as a pretext to give the people the impression that they have power over their own future, which yet is not the case. Let's take a good example at the period of the COVID. We now realize now that the rights of the people have been abused. So where is the self-expression? Where is the people whom you claim they have power? We have seen how people have been abused in Europe, in the Western nation. As far as the COVID is concerned, the rights of the people are being taken away under the concept of a pandemic. So this democracy we are talking about does not even work in the West, and neither can it work in Africa. And that is why we are saying that as Africans, we need to be able to come up with our own system, build systems that reflects our culture, our traditions, our values, the embodiment of our identity. If we do like that, maintaining who we are, we can grow with our own system. But you're expecting to grow with a system that was imputed. As a matter of fact, it was a condition that if we were going to give you independence, this is a system which you must use. That was only to allow the imperialists to give division. And that is the rise of tribalism in Africa, poverty in Africa, nepotism in Africa. I mean, that as an idea of making presidential seat become an ancestral tool, it's all because of democracy. And that is a simple truth, because if without democracy, people will not know you are Yoruba. We need systems that are able to weld that people together, because as a matter of fact, we must accept in the beginning that we are all different. And it is in these differences that We find goals and objectives to bind ourselves together. That's the beauty of life. We cannot say because we are divided, it becomes a problem. No, we all cannot be the same. We all cannot do the same thing. We all cannot have the same name. We are different and we are diverse in our attitude, in our nature, in our character. But the objectives of building a nation is what brings us together. So whether you are from this tribe, it doesn't matter anymore, because we are looking at it from the national level that we are a nation and not that we are a tribe. So it's a form of a system, it's a form of government, it's a form of leadership. Until we begin to apply such system, Mr. Liu, we will grow. As a matter of fact, we cannot doing all this in-house fighting like what we find in different parts, Mozambique, Somalia, Sudan, Mali, Guinea Conakry, Cameroon, where we are having all this in-house fighting in the presence of the imperialists. All this fighting is going on in the presence of the imperialists. And no Africans seem to understand yet that we are fighting a historic fight which came from a history of colonization, imperialism, and yet all these things are still done in the presence of the imperialists. This is the most challenging part, Mr. Liu. So we need to get ourselves together. That's very important. We need to get ourselves together.
We need to get ourselves Dr. Nick, the notion of politics in Africa, are we not also missing the point because we see politics as the clear route to become rich, to get honor from amongst our peers and to change our lives, and not necessarily the route to work for the people?
Thank you very much. I think you've put your finger on it. And that's why a lot of elites in Africa are crooks. You see, to be able to understand how what you are saying is important, let's go back to this thing that I've always tried to describe. There are three key pillars in a nation. We have politics, we have economics, and we have development. These are three key pillars in any nation and in any society. And last time I explained that for the politics to be good, the economics to be good, and the development to be good, you need a great education. If you don't have a great education, these three factors will all be wrong. And Africa is suffering today because all these three factors are wrong. Because the white man who gave us that thing called independence, he gave us also a type of education, and he knew that that type of education will not liberate our minds. So we've been spinning around in circles and doing the wrong things and hoping that we would grow. And therefore, we have a lot of elites who have gone to school and have not developed the capacity, I said capacity, to change pineapple into pineapple juice. That is the problem. And therefore, they will talk from morning to evening, but they lack the capacity for this transformation. And when we now go to our universities where we are pouring a lot of people on the streets with the same kind of a mindset, they start fighting each other for those political positions. And those political positions have now been transformed into a job. And when people access it, whether they are zombies or whatever, they just get honor, they get money, they get the women, they get everything that they have always wanted, and then they kick everyone else around. And like we said, democracy doesn't thrive where there is poverty and ignorance. So now they will come with this fake thing called elections, and during those elections, these elites would organize and buy the consciences of the electorate and do whatever they have to do. And so that's why we keep having this violence, this fight, this killing, this burning, and so on, because he that holds the power holds the treasury, and we lack the capacity to generate wealth that goes into that treasury. The only way we generate wealth in Africa, we cut tree trunks and sell them raw. We dig up gold and sell it raw, oil and sell it raw. We don't know how to do it. And come to think of it, all these raw things that we sell in reality doesn't amount to very much, because the person who is taking it away from you, he adds value to it and sells it back to you and makes 1,000% gain. So we have a huge problem. We have a huge problem where a lot of crooks have seen politics as the way to solve their problems as the way to go up, and politics has become dirty, so to speak. They will tell you that politics cannot be, Christians cannot do politics. Politics is dirty. Politics. So they try to push people away, and they use some very Machiavellian methods of, you know, sticking in place. Violence is part of it. Tribalism is part of it. You know, calling others names and so on. And they give the impression that these other people are not fit. It's only these people who can be fit. And I like the way Professor Lumumba puts it. You know, when somebody who is a crook gets into the position of power, then the people of that village will say, no, it's our thief, it's our own thief. So, and so this is the kind of mentality, and the key to solving these problems is for us to step back a little bit, and in stepping back a little bit, we need to understand what Bishop Duncan Nicholas, I think his first name must be Nicholas. Okay, he has Duncan. I've been confused. All right, so he has Nicholas and he has Williams to it. So I keep confusing now. I'm happy. So Bishop Duncan Nicholas Williams. I don't know his church, but he is one of these Pentecostal churches in Ghana, and he is this huge guy who always wears a white thing up and down, and he has a very beautiful voice, and he talks with a lot of energy. And he pointed out that what happens in Africa with this our fake democracy is that a group of people form a political party, you know, cook up things, and another group forms up about 3-4, they cook up things, and all they do is group A, if let's suppose that group A by whatever means got the power, then when they are in there for 5 years, they don't attend to the problems of the community and the problems of the people. All they are looking at is what strategies are we putting in place to stay in. And then group B is not helping group A to stay in. They will rather help group A to commit a lot of crimes so they can, or rather make mistakes so they can easily throw them out and get the power. So we have a seesaw system where A is pushing out B, B is pushing out C, D is fighting. So it's an eternal fight amongst all these elites who use all sorts of tricks to grab power and take away and steal the state treasury. That's all they're interested in, and are not interested in the people. So that is where it is, Mr. Liu. And African elites have number one, they are poorly schooled. Number two, they don't know how to create wealth. Number three, they don't know how to solve inherent problems of people. They are very greedy. They tell a lot of lies. And all they're interested in is themselves. And you know that in any community, in any human community, what we have to understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs and make sure that we help people to ascend up those needs. And you know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has got 5 levels in the pyramid and 1 level out of the pyramid. And at the bottom you have the need for food, for water, for excretion, for sleep. And in the second, and air. In the second level, you have the need for safety and security. In the third level, the need for love. And the fourth level is ego, that is self-pride. And in the fifth level, you have this thing called self-actualization. And real people who are mature are out of this triangle. They're in the sixth level called the transcendental phase. When you get to the transcendental phase, it's a mindset change where you realize that life is not about you any longer. You have satisfied your needs and so on, and you realize that it's worthier to give than to receive, where you begin now to commit your life more to the benefit of the community, common good, other people. You derive your pleasure by helping the society, helping others who are needy to rise. So we need to get more people to that. But we have leaders and elites and so on who are way up there, but their mindset is still at the lowest part of the triangle, about food, sex, enjoyment, carnal in their minds, and they tell a lot of lies.
Okay. Professor Mark Anthony, Dr. Nick is talking about the fact that, okay, we get into politics, we make as much money as possible, and then we go buying the consciences of the poor masses, since it's also linked or tied to our economic situation. Is that not also where the problem is? That what we know as elections, the winners are not actually winners, but those who are able to buy as much as they can for persons to put them or maintain them in position.
Mr. Leo, that's the reason for coup d'etats.
Okay.
That's the reason why you saw Mali, people coming out in the streets. That's why you see Cameroon having a problem of, we have to call it a crisis. That is the reason why you go to Chad, the same stuff. You go right now, Guinea, because some individuals owned by their greed, primarily based on the fact that they were wrongly educated. In fact, they were prone to believe that that is the path to getting rich. And so they enter the stuff, they got what they wanted. Some of them have empowered themselves, they have become very rich. But Dr. Nick cited something which I'll repeat it. The fact that they have money does not mean that they have outgrown that basic thinking of, I need this for my safety. I need this to have enough to eat. But they fail to understand that that is not where it ends. You can have to eat, and as long as your next brother does not have to eat, he will enter your house. He will enter your house. That's as simple as it is. When you have, and the next person there is a beggar, he doesn't have, he sees you living well, he will break through to get it. That is why we have economic problems. In fact, most of our problems in Africa are economic problems. We know that they are generated from that wrong education that we received. But most of our problems in Africa are economic problems. When you see people going out on the streets, we lack jobs, we want employment. They are talking to those individuals who came to power, promising them that, okay, we'll give you jobs, we'll make you have something to eat, we'll share what we are going to receive with you. And when they enter there, they do not have that capacity to meet up. They don't have it. They lack the capacity to meet up. Why? They don't know how to create those jobs they claim that they were going to create. And so the people sit and, where is it coming from? What is happening? I'm not getting what I need. They say, let's go remove this guy from power. Yes. And at the end of the day, a coup d'etat takes place. In Cameroon here, let me use Cameroon. Remember, the basic cry of the people of the English expression in Cameroon, precisely, let me use the word Southern Cameroon, they had a problem. They claimed that they were marginalized. They had that from independence, that we had been marginalized. And it has been growing, And at a particular period of time, it bursts out. What is then behind? Economics. And so, we have a situation where we have persons who have been given power who do not have the capacity to give to the people what they need. And I wrote an article today and I was talking about, in fact, the article has to do with 8 problems that can make a man rich in Africa. Because most of the time you see problems. The first one I wrote today and posted on Facebook was hunger. Hunger is one of the killing problems we have in Cameroon, in Africa, to be precise, which is the reason why we have coup d'etats, why we have all those stuff. People are hungry. And so, Mr. Leo, I was saying that people can transform hunger into wealth. In what way? If I see hunger, I look at Africa. Africa has 60% arable on farmed land. Africa has a young population of close to 60%. The population of Africa is young, below 18 years, so about 60% of them. That tells you that we can generate a kind of agricultural industry that will transform Africa into a great nation. Look at it. The population of Africa is close to 1.4 billion persons today. By 2050, the population of Africa will be 2 about 2.4, 2.5 billion people. The hunger will multiply, right? Which implies that wise persons now will know that the land that we have is ready for use. We could start producing food, which will solve the hunger problem. And when it's solving the hunger problem, people identify you like a solution provider. You can then be a better leader for them tomorrow. And so at times we keep on crying, but we do not look at the opportunities that are found in the problems which we have. And that is what Africans need to start doing. Let's look at how to solve the problems that we are having. But those we have in power do not think like that.
Okay.
They only think of themselves, their family, and what they can get. So you will see a situation where we have elites, people in power who just want to eat and allow their next neighbor to die. But that is the reason why they will keep on being fought.
Okay, but this one says, hi, then this say that what an old man can see while sitting, a young man cannot see while standing has failed us very badly. Is that not also where we are, why we are where we are? That is yes. Yes. They say we know what we are doing because what we can see.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, in this case, given that most of the old people in Africa did not see anything, the white man saw for them. That's for sure, that's for sure. The white man did see for them and told them that I have seen this thing, and so you go get it. They did not sit to see. I think it simply comes to say that experience would give you reasons to do certain things better than the person who have not had experience. However, those who have had experience and have seen the suffering of the people are not solving their problems. If these persons had truly had this experience, then they would be solving these problems. For example, we are saying that if you have been in leadership for over 30 years and your country is regressing, it is obvious that you have not done anything so far. So you are not a leader to be emulated. I cannot actually emulate you because I know for sure that I will be actually copying the wrong things to implement in or somewhere. So the major problem in Africa is that those who negotiated their different countries with the white regime that was in place, be it the regime that was in Belgium, France, Germany, just to name these few, negotiated it and got to a certain point and struggled to contextualize it, but failed to understand that they were trying to put it in their own context. They did not take into consideration their people. Let me explain. If you look at, let me take the case of Dar es Salaam, as said by Walter Rooney. It was already a place that was developed. It had streets, which these streets were not constructed by a white man. But when colonization set in, these streets were underdeveloped. And who underdeveloped these streets? The mindset that was given to that African, who in turn saw his brother as a commodity, gave him little or no reason to continue with the development of that street. And so instead for him to look at the fact that the road was perhaps 4 meters and it was good for him to make it 5, he traded his brother and decided to narrow the road by putting up shades on the road as a market point for slaves and for slavery to continue. And so these Africans now who took these things in the late 50s and early 60s in the name of what we call independence, this is what they have decided to do. Once A succeeds in negotiating with that white man, he comes back and paints a picture that B was a very bad man. And once it is given to him, he struggles to keep for himself. And when the people rise against him, the white man in turn will see that you are not serving my interests anymore. Because the way it was given to you, your people could be in bondage, but yet something was still leaving the country. But when it gets to this stage, it is difficult because all what we see now is the white man, because he had to put this system in place which we are fighting against today. So the old people in Africa now have blind eyes. And I think it is time, for the fact that the population of Africa is over 60% youth, I think it is obvious for these old people to understand that there is no way the failed system they have had in place will solve the problem of the youth. So right now, the youth can see better than them, because some of the documents and some of the developmental ideas they had, we have seen that they are not helping us in any way. And so what we need right now is that we want to bring in young persons who are willing to lead. Now, there's another problem with these young persons. To determine the kind of young person, it should not be done on the basis of that white man democracy, because it has already failed. So if we want to rely on that white man democracy, we should not forget we shall forever be failures. I want to say that China is my example. She may not be a very good country when certain things are concerned with Africa. She saw no reasons to continuously giving Hong Kong the right she got from Britain in 1997. And she understood that certain things were setting into China which served as barrier to China's development. The Chinese did study these things and said, when we were in control of this area, this is where we were. When the British left it, when we began making our voices heard, when we succeeded to put a certain government in place, which is that of Carrie Lam, they saw the development that came up from their GDP changed. They moved to a better position. And so they understood that if such a leader who supports the idea of Beijing could be somewhere, it therefore means that this person is the right person, and if we can continue with this, it is going to change it. That is why they had to change certain things. Now, what is the point? If we want to continue with this belief that the Western democracy is going to solve our problems, sadly, most of their institutions which we rely on so much, the Bretton Woods institutions, whose agenda is not there to develop Africa. Because if you were to go back to read Death 8, written by Dambiso Moyo, wherein she talks about how Africa is grossly being underdeveloped. If you were to check on profiting from poverty, which you will realize that Africa loses over 13 billion CFA francs in a day. Pardon, over $13 billion in a day, while she gets just $1 billion as aid from the Western world. So you realize that somebody comes and tells you that, okay, take my democracy, which is causing you underdevelopment. And the sad thing is that the African democracy now has gotten a very terrible position, and these are what I call political laboratories. They have built certain people who are now acting as their robot, and we call them elites. They have already failed. That is the reason why, if you were to take Cameroon as a case study, from the time we began relying on this elite up to date, the development of our areas are still on papers. They take to certain places documents which shows that they have already tarred certain roads, but the road in reality is still earth road. So that would tell you that because of this kind of democracy, we have political human beings that have been made. And so these political laboratories, they are the most dangerous thing Africa is suffering from. And these laboratories are being fostered by greed.
Mr. Andrew Nateme Bako, we're talking about democracy in Africa. What do we make of the institutions we have in Africa? Because our democracy is supposed to be guided by institutions. For example, we have in Cameroon what we call the National Assembly, the Senate, that is supposed to be regulating how things function. We have the Constitutional Council, that's the case for Cameroon, and other institutions that are operating in different countries. But when we look at what obtains in Chad today, what is happening in Guinea, what is happening in Mali, how do we explain that we have these institutions that have been existing for so long, they have not worked in favor of discouraging coups?
Mr. KUM LEONARD, I know and I strongly understand that Africa is a continent, and Africa was broken down into 54 nations, which we call today Congo, Guinea, Cameroon, Chad, and all of that. That was the division which took place in Berlin Conference 1884 to 1885, whereby they put Africa on the table as a product to be shared among the European imperialists. That is the genealogy for Africans to understand its form of governance as we speak today. You see, until we Africans, we come to the understanding that there is no point for us to get into the game or the business of blaming each other, blaming our leaders. People have tried in different ways, and people have chains of responsibility. One of the things we need to understand here is that any democracy without autonomy, it's like a businessman without capital. We cannot mention all these institutions under a democracy where you do not have full political rights. That is an abuse of democracy. So we should not even go on that area, because to start with, the democracy has been very abusive to us because we are not in control of our democracy. And you must understand that in the history of the Berlin Conference, 1945 was raised up the United Nations as the government that was going to oversee all the countries that are going to be members of the United Nations. So that means that Cameroon, for example, is like a federal state of the United Nations. And that is why our democracy is being over-controlled by the UN or by the US. So that's what I was talking about, leadership in leadership against leadership. So this is where we are, where we do not have that full political right because Africa was sold. And on the basis of the sales of Africa in the Berlin Conference, that makes the West to, in the 60s, Africa was what I call being born again, or Africa was reborn by the West, whereby the gene and the DNA of the West was embedded in the Africans. So there was a condition that any of a government or leaders or people who want to manage these countries which they have broken down as divisions, as individual nations, you want to run the country, they put you certain conditions in order for a government to be set up. We saw that as well in Cameroon. So they made it in such a way that the government became a private state-owned companies that are run on the behalf of the West to exploit their people. And let me say this to emphasize so that people can understand. In that Berlin Conference, there was an objective set over Africa, and that objective still stands today in the entire Africa. I'll give some few examples to substantiate that. The policies or the agreement and the objectives over Africa for the Berlin sales of Africa was that the West was going to get 85% of Africa's natural resources and human resources. I may not go so deep to explain how that happens till today, which still happens. Both our human resources are being exploited and our natural resources are being exploited. It's to an extent where if you get to understand, you come to realize how ignorant and how blind we have become, whereby they take from you and then they still make you travel out to go and work, help them build what they took from you. That is the level at which we are today. So that objective has been set in place, and that is why you realize that the governments that were put in place were to make sure that they keep the 85% of the people down, because their objective is to exploit Africa at 85%. And that is why you realize that the government we have in place, the institutions we have in place, the organizations right down to the Senate and all those things you mentioned, they do not reflect the people, because they are all there to, how will I call it, to keep an existing treaties which are not discussed in our parliament. I'll give you an example where, look at Ethiopia, for example. Abiy Ahmed took over power in 2000 is it 2018 or 2019 or so. He made an existing treaty of the United States in Ethiopia, which is non-renewable, that America controls all its natural resources in Ethiopia. And all American companies in Ethiopia does not pay tax. The tax evasion, tax erosion in Ethiopia alone rises up to 2.7 GDP. On tax evasion alone in Ethiopia. You go to Nigeria, Nigeria is not run by Nigeria, Nigeria is run by the United Kingdom. You come to Cameroon, Cameroon is not run by the Cameroonians, it's run by France. So this is the partitioning of all the African countries which they have put down into pieces. And I go further to say that our only way to emerge, remember what they did, the first thing they did was separating Africans from Africans. So that means that until we begin to seek in support with the diaspora, and I'll give you a very clear example before I leave the mic, Mr. KUM LEONARD. The reason why the Northwest and Southwest has persisted till this point is because the Amber Boys have been able to build an affiliation with the diasporans, and the government is not finding it easy. Each time there is an alliance within the home and abroad, whether you like it or not, they must bound to be a success. And that is why the imperialists make it in such a way that because they understand that the people who can liberate Africa are people who know them, those that have been there. And that's why you realize that 20,000 military have been deployed down there, and recently 2,000 was added, 22,000 against 2,000 armed separatist fighters, and that war has not been easy. It is still persisting till now because the diasporans are behind it. So what we are saying here is that until Africans get to the point where they understand that their basis, the foundation of solving their problem is uniting. That it means that seeking in a collaboration, collective joint effort in building Africa with the Africans in the diaspora, we are going to succeed. But if we want to stay here in Africa and think that we are going to achieve this on our own, it's very impossible, because at the level of our government is highly monitored, whereby our leadership up there is being controlled at the level of the UN. We have seen that in several countries. Libya, Sudan, Ethiopia. America convened a meeting 2 weeks ago to decide what should be done in Ethiopia. These are what we are talking about, that we have foreign influence and dictation coming from the West, whereby because of our division, they find an opportunity to impose on us on what we should do. We understand that we did not gain independence by fighting for it. We gained independence through a negotiation, because it was all put down on the table. And that body which was broken down in 54 pieces needs to come together in order to function. Okay. But if we are going to work in individually, they enter Libya, AU did not do anything. No African nation did anything. You can see how, to the extent at which we are divided. We can't go further this way. Okay. It's not possible.
We are going to take a short break. When we come back, we continue with the discussions out here in our studios.
DSTV English Pack, your subscription enters a new dimension.
It's so nice, it's so nice.
Movies, series, novellas, emotions are more deeper in English language.
That part is a little dramatic.
Enjoy La Liga from the front row and the Premier League in immersion. On Nickelodeon, English is just superpower absolute.
For the surprise, please go now.
With E and One Magic in original version. Reality TV becomes real TV. And on African News and Discovery, News and Discovery shines worldwide. Post new programs with a DSTV English Pack option of Canal Plus and its 15 premium channels. Accessible as from 5,000 friends. Take advantage now.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime on my Media Prime. We continue with our discussions on the first topic for tonight. Dr. Nick Ngwanyam, should we still be talking about the fact that we were misled? These things were imposed on us more than 60 years after independence?
No. We have to learn to grow. You have to learn to solve your own problems yourself. DIY. Do it yourself. And if you don't realize who you are and wake up and do it yourself, and you think it's the white man or the Chinese or the Lebanese who will come or the Indian who will come and tell you to do it yourself, then you are the one who's stupid. Now, you see, what we called independence, it works like this. When a child is born in a maternity, the child is given a birth certificate. The child receives a birth certificate as having independence from the mother's womb. That's it. But that child goes to school, you know, grows and gets mature. In a place like America, that child will leave the house at 18 years. In Cameroon, if they leave by 27 years, you are lucky. If sometimes they are there for 35 years, even 40 years, some never get married. They eat their mother's food until they get buried too. So it is when that, you see, when does a child leave the father's house and go found his own family, get married and create his own family? The child gets married, let's say at 25, 27, 30, when the child has the capacity to feed the family, the family that is going to come up with. And that capacity to do something to feed the family is what he has been doing, you know, from when he had the independence from the mother. So on day 1 or day 0, we get the political independence. So in 1960 we got the political independence. It was just a paper. But today we are 60 years old and we are still not able to write our names. That is the problem. We are like that African young man who is 40 years old, 45 years old, and is still wearing his father's suits, he's still wearing his father's shoes, he still beats his mother up for breakfast and doesn't even know how to fetch firewood. That is what the Africans are. So the question is, what are we going to do to actually be independent? We are going to do what it takes to grow our economy. And there's no way we can grow our economy effectively without changing our education. We have to study the what, the why, and the how. It's very, very important. And we have to learn from those nations that have succeeded to see exactly how they did it. And we do exactly that. For starters, remember that China is a great nation today, and 40 years ago, they were not as good as they are today. Their leader changed 70% of their universities to polytechnics, and that is what we have to do in Cameroon. That's what we need to do in Africa. Our education has got to change. And let me tell you this, it doesn't matter, and this goes to all African nations and everybody who cares to listen, and all regions and so on that pride yourself in raw materials. Raw materials are great, but raw materials are not the thing. If we continue on this path of adoring raw materials just for their sake, we are not going anywhere. Until you are able to transform those raw materials into finished products and export to other nations, if you cannot do that, you will continue to be a slave, and a very good one for that matter. And as time is going, many other nations are getting technology to be able to transform things, but the African nations are sleeping. It is about the transfer of technology, and if we don't do that now, in the next 20 years it will be a mess for us. You can see the violence that is going up because of the demographic changes. The youth population is going up, lack of jobs and so on. You cannot continue with universities where 80% of what you are teaching are art subjects. You have to change your universities where 80% of what you are teaching is technology, industry, entrepreneurship, and how to make things function. It's very, very important that we get economic independence, not because we have the Chinese and the Indians doing things for us, but our own children must do it for us. That is what emergence is all about.
Dr. Nick, we've seen the coup in Mali, we've seen that in Guinea.
Yes.
And is it because of what you're saying?
Yes, yes. It's because of those things. And today I was listening to a video clip of Thomas Sankara, you know, who was giving a vision of his country. And Thomas Sankara is the best example that Africa could ever have. And I would implore you to play that video repeatedly on our Media Prime so that Africa can learn. There is the video of Thomas Sankara painting a picture of the government and the relationship between government and people and what people should be doing, government expenditure and so on. Is a great guy. Then there's the video that I also sent to you, that young Gambian boy, who I'm sure at time you remember that young Gambian boy. I don't know his name. Who knows his name? Well, that young Gambian boy, I think he should be only about 27 or 28. Yeah, maybe not. And the way he expresses himself, I wish I could talk like he does. And the guy is so full of energy, full of ideas and so on. The way he talks, people are just clapping for him. We all need to sit down, from the youngest to the oldest, and listen to these two people. Listen to Thomas Sankara. Listen to this young boy from Gambia. That young boy can lead Africa. That young boy can be the president of Africa, and Africa will succeed. And there's another young guy, the governor of in this state next to Cameroon, Cross River here. That young man is a great guy. Give Nigeria to him, and in 10 years you will not recognize Nigeria. So it's about us putting these energies together, getting the right people together. Who, when we are saying what Africa needs is enlightened, benevolent despots, we are talking about young men like Sankara. We are talking about a young man like this boy. We are talking about a young man like this governor. Enlightened means you know what it takes to make things happen. You know, it is not like you are going to be holding democratic meetings and asking what should you do. You don't even know how to write your name. No. He knows how to feed his people. He knows how to create jobs. He knows how to bring technology and so on. That is not even for discussion. Then he is benevolent, means he knows how to give it out to the people. He is not greedy. He knows how to share things out. He knows how to feed the nation at the table. That's what it is. And despot means, to be a despot means you don't take those decisions based on democracy, because democracy is crazy. You say when it is good, it is good. When Thomas Sankara realized that all these government cars and so on were all hopeless, he said, I don't need it, and he put everybody on a Renault 6, take it or leave it. That's how it works.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Africans need to stand up and start doing things that will develop Africa instead of blaming the West, because as the saying goes, if you make yourself bananas, monkeys will eat you. Sally is writing from Mutengene. Good evening to you, Sally. Good job, Leo, and your panelists are hosts of Nigerians watch your program each time. Thanks for Cameroonians championing African cause of socioeconomic and political progress. May God help Africa. Raimi Joseph is writing from Nigeria. Good evening to you, Raimi. This one reads, good evening, Mr. Leo, and the rest of the panelists. There is this saying which goes, a bird which grows up in a cage thinks that freedom is a crime. African leaders are the problem of Africa. The panelists can further expatiate on that quotation. Kema Emmanuel is writing from Yaoundé. Good evening to you, Emmanuel. Pilo writing from Kumbasis. Good evening to you all. They compare two or more things. A person cannot stay in power for so long and expect peace. The people need a change of persons. Pilo from Kumba. There is no perfect democracy in the world, so African leaders should stop fooling us, the youth. Okay, good evening to you, Pilo. It's been a while. Good evening, Mr. Leo, and my regards to the panelists. I love the program. I would like to point the arrow to Rwanda that has rolled out tribalistic affiliations. If that issue of tribal tide is not erased out of Africa, she will never develop. Tribal hate is what is killing us. Christian is writing from Bamenda. Should we not also now, as Africans, be looking at the development factor against democratic factor? We all are wanting to see the best persons elected as mayors, the best persons elected as president, without actually looking at what our development agenda should look like comparatively to what is happening in some Middle East countries that are not clearly democratic from the word democracy itself, and what we find obtaining in China.
Okay, the issue is that Africa remains unique in its way. We might look at what is happening in Asia, might look at what is happening in Southern America, Europe. But if Africa needs to rise up, Africa does not need to rise up as single nations. I'm taking something that Bako said. Africa needs to first of all come together before they can actually emerge. I want to use some examples. When single-handedly Mahatma Gaddafi rose up, understood the game of Europeans, decided to work for the benefit of his people, break ties with Europe. In fact, they leveled sanctions on him, thinking that through the sanctions, his nation will break. But he was that enlightened, benevolent despot. He immediately wrote a book, a little book, the Green Book. In that Green Book, it was his manifesto of work. It was his vision that he laid, how Libya and Africa as a whole can emerge. And he planted a system where development begins from the outskirts and comes to the cities. Therefore, they go to the villages and start developing from there. He launched the Green Revolution, which was for food. That is a nation where there was no debt. In fact, Libya had no debt till the death of Gaddafi. Libya owed no nation. And Libya was a nation where when a man gets married, young couples are given money to begin their life. When a child is born, money is given to that child so that they can manage the life of that child with as he's growing. Education was practically free. And that nation was growing at a fast rate. Before I think in the 90s, to make a call to Europe was costly, about 1,000 something francs CFA from Cameroon. Until the day the Libyan leader single-handedly launched a satellite in the air for Africa, which Europeans did not like. Why did they kill him? He did not have people. In fact, he had not brought Africans to work together with him. He tried in different means. The Africans leaders were already having a tie with Europe that it was difficult for them to break. And so he was killed because he wanted the good of Africans. He thought like that. He walked like that. Dr. Nick just mentioned Thomas Sankara. When you follow the life of Thomas Sankara from 1983 coming into power, he was killed in 1987. Why? He is an individual who came with a vision. African problems solved by Africans in an African way. And he succeeded in creating that path. Even changed the name of his nation from what they used to call it, Upper Volta. He changed it to what we call today Burkina Faso. And made the nation to be at a progressive position. He was killed not because he did not want to develop his nation, but because he did not want to stand with the Europeans. Yeah. Secondly, Mr. Leo, can I just get it up? Let me get it out of me. Look at it. We have John Pombe Magufuli of recent, that's the most recent case. An individual who in 5 years stepped into power, contracts that could not be completed by his predecessors, he completed them, brought new development projects, and did what people had not done in 5 years. And he made it clear, if you want to export any raw material, you need to come to his nation. Build, for example, if it's oil, you need to build a refinery there. You process it there, not in your country. You want to take out gold, there must be. So with all that kind of thinking for his people, he was cut short. He couldn't see the day of light. That is what happens to Africans who want to make the difference when you are alone. Ahmed in Ethiopia is facing it right now with America because he wanted to step out. And struggling to step out, he took power from individuals who had been in power for 30 years. Today they are the ones who are causing problems. The people of Tigray. The Tigrans had been in power for 30 years. And there was nothing to run home with. Ethiopia was being presented to the world as a dying nation. A nation of free with hungry people and all that. The pictures that were coming out of Ethiopia were wrong. Ahmed said, no, we need to change this. The moment he started, now he is being threatened. That is what happens when you, as an African leader, you are fighting alone. And that is why we need a united Africa. If we have to be able to succeed, this one is the only means. If we have to come out and make a difference, what the European Union has done, we need to do it better than them. Where we have an African Union that has not only political power, they also have economic autonomy, which can be able to hit its hand on the table. Look at it. You cannot claim that if France is coming to do business with Cameroon, who is doing business? The entire European Union is doing business with Cameroon. Why? Because they are using the euro. And with the euro, they determine to you what how you sell what you produce. And so that becomes our problem. So we need people who understand this so that we can unite.
The heir, as long as he accepts to be a child, he is not different from a slave, although he owns all things. This is Africa State. Kwango is writing from Boya. Good evening to you, Kwango. Good evening, Mr. Leo. And to everyone else in the studio. Africa has one of the finest all over the world when it comes to intellect and expertise in all spheres of life. Africa has one problem, and that is greed. If the youths don't seize Africa and drive it to the direction it should go, then Africa is doomed. Tebit is writing from Yaoundé. Good evening to you, Tebit. Ben Ayade, Governor of Cross River State. What an interesting program, Kum. Keep it up. Isaiah is writing from Kumba. That's his name. Ben Ayade, yes. Okay, good evening to you, Mr. Sama Abang, writing there from Boya. Good evening, Mr. Leo. I love your program. I want to ask this question. I don't really know these men ahead of us. Really listen to problems like this. I am Wamba Cyprian, writing from Limbe. Good evening to you. Mr. Leo, can someone there explain to Africans why a unique Africa currency not yet established to enhance our own economic power might even with our abundant natural deposits? Obase Adingi Akendekwero, very interesting name there. Yes. Okay, Raimi writing from Nigeria. Good evening to you. Good evening, Mr. Kum. The underdevelopment of Cameroon is strictly due to what Dr. Nick just described in a wonderfully simple way. A complete overhaul of the destruction of great brains in our present-day higher education system is urgently needed. Mobunka is writing from Concha. Good evening, sir. I'm happy. Happy birthday. And to no, it's not related to what we are discussing. Now, we have cited, Dr. Nick is citing the case of Thomas Sankara. You guys are talking of what has actually killed Africa, using the examples of the likes of the fallen Libyan guide, Muammar Gaddafi. But today, we still believe in Africa that solutions to our problems can only come from the West. Isn't it paradoxical?
Now, we have a major problem, which is ethno-cultural.
Okay.
Yes, we have ethno-cultural problem, which is a big hindrance to democracy. We should not forget. If we fail to enhance our economy, we cannot completely have what you may want to call the Western democracy, which I am still not in support of it because it is not developed in Africa. The Western democracy is not developed in Europe. We should not forget, as at the time Europe was developed by Africans who were slaves in Europe, there was no democracy in Europe. The Africans who built America, America was not built on the basis of democracy because Africans were excluded in the electoral process in America to buy food and to do a lot of things, schools and so many things. This alone would tell you that if you talk about democracy, then the Africans would have been included in that time. So Americans were heading to the pool in the name of democracy while Africans were excluded. And you talk about democracy. So generally, I think democracy is just, it's an illusion, and even the West do not actually use democracy. If the West were to, if the West were to use democracy, then what happened in Britain would not be there. What I want the viewers to know is that democracy is not what is being used in Europe, in America, in Asia, Canada, just to say this few, to develop these countries. There is something which they are using, and they are giving us the picture of democracy because they want to subject us in the loggerhead that we are having, so that it will be an easy way for they to come in and continue tapping out. But what we need to know is that we have ethno-cultural issues which is causing and is hindering the level of development in Africa. And we think that if we should put these things in place, we are going to have a great change. Now, I will still go back to look at the elite. In elitism, we have a couple of things which you find in this. You have economic elite, you have political elite, and you have education scholars elite. Now, if these persons decide to come together, we are going to make a change. The issue of African leaders, like your question goes, is most of the African leaders who have attempted bringing Africa together, who have been cut short by the West, is resulting from the fact that most of the Africans are still living in greed. It is very simple for an African leader to come up and succeed. I want to take the case, if you were to look at the index of persons who have changed constitutions and are now working with the so-called democratic institutions, the president of Rwanda is enlisted. That is what I want the viewers to know. The president of Rwanda is enlisted and his country is advancing. But according to the Western Index of Democratic Leaders, he is not found in it. Rather, he is seen as somebody who changes the constitution of his country. Now, we have two problems. We have those who have decided to stay on power without making any change, and we have those who have decided to hide power, which the people would have used to make change in their countries. Those who have decided to hide power, it is unfortunate that it is the same persons who are on power, because instead to have what is given to them by the people under the name of democracy to develop the country for the people, they have decided to take it and subject the people to misery, poverty, underdevelopment, lack of educational system that will bring change. I said it to a couple of you some time ago. I said, if you go to Europe, interestingly, they have so many colleges, and their colleges, they train and they release people who come out immediately and start solving societal problems. While what we have here is we take the youth, we give them a longer period of education, which they will still come out, and they depend on traveling to Europe to be economic migrants or stay behind and are working in areas where they did not study because they want to survive. So democracy cannot indeed thrive, let me borrow from Dr. Nick, once there is poverty. There is no way that what democracy will thrive. Europeans have struggled even in Europe. There is what we call today in Europe the European identity. Now, which is the reason why no matter how we keep on castigating racism, it's on its rise. Because Europeans are struggling to know who they are. Which in summary, it's what Professor Mark Antony calls tribalism. Now, they now know who they are, and they think that because of knowing who they are, you have come into their countries and you are taken from them. So I want to believe that African leaders who are still afraid that if they continue with the path set by persons like Muammar Gaddafi, whom the West termed as a very bad man, Thomas Sankara, and interestingly today we have the president of Rwanda, who is also gradually entering into that list of persons the West would term as oppressors to their countries. But sadly, companies like Volkswagen, they are coming into Rwanda to sign contracts to start coupling cars in Rwanda. So if you are that African leader who feels that if you have to take the footstep of Muammar Gaddafi, you will be killed, it is happening so because you have first of all destroyed the fabrics of your own nation, and your people do no longer trust you. These are persons who are supposed to protect you under normal circumstances. That is the reason why the people of Rwanda are protecting their leader. No matter what you say about the leader of Rwanda and a few African countries, they are under the protection of their people because they see their being in power changing their situations, and the economy is changing by the day.
Good evening, Mr. Liu and the panelists. Democracy in Africa is not a new concept, but rather it has been hijacked by the West using the Bible and the gun. Our right has been changed by all means. The only issue which Africa is facing is regimes surrogates who are acting in favor of the West. Looking back at our cultures and customs, we had our own form of democracy based on checks and balances within our traditional systems. Molombe Hans is writing from Boya. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Africa must leave European methods such as democracy. Africa should take in dictatorship like North Korea. Tafa Simon is writing from Buddha. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Emelda from Benin Republic. I'm really enjoying this program. As your colleagues say, if Africa can unite as Europe and also have their own currency, but because of greed and personal interests, how will they unite so that we can have a better future in Africa? Good evening to you. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Hear my melody and sing it in your own way. The reason why this war is growing alarming in the Northwest and Southwest is because the government is giving a listening ear to those who claim they are intelligent, not knowing they are the ones spoiling this country. This is so. If gold can rust, what will iron do? Is my question. Zangti Stanley is writing from Yaoundé. Wow. This one says, good job to you all at the panel, as you are slow but very steady. What that you grind every unwanted grain on your path. Okay. Why do we still believe in Western solutions than believing in ourselves? Because almost everything that we have a problem with, we believe that only the West can solve it for us.
Mr. Liu, that's an important question, and it's very important for us to understand the condition of our people. If we do not understand the condition of our people, both home and abroad, I think that we'll end up blaming and killing ourselves and feeling that we are the cause of or the origin of our problems, which we cannot play down this game in the midst of the oppressor, in the midst of the imperialists, in the midst of the multinationals in Africa. At the end of the day, I think that it will only makes us a big fool. If you look, coming back to the context of democracy, I want us to look at it from where it all originated. In 1945, at the UN National Security Council, there are 5 veto members who control the votes of 10 non-veto members who are voted after 2 years. At the level of the veto members, elections do not take place. As a matter of fact, it is not rotational and power is hereditary. And that explains why that Macron of 45 years old will come and then act like his ancestor of 1884. This is just to tell you that they have a fixed plan in place to subject Africa under where it is today. And that is why I kept on trying to educate Africans to understand why African is not given at least 2 seats at the Security Council is because Africa is a subject matter from 1884 to 1945. To 1960 was already settled that Africa was what has been sold. And that is why you realize that when Christ break down the bread and said, this is my body which is broken down for you. So what he gave to each person is different from what you receive. So you have something this person doesn't have. And until you people come together, that body is not that, how will I call it, that sovereign. So sovereignty is in our unity. And this we must understand that is the system of Africa. Now let's look at the 60s. We all understand that, like I tried to explain about the principle of the 85%. What happens here is that 85% of Africa's natural resources is held by the imperialists. A lot of Africans feel that it's only the 14 countries, French country. No, it goes all around. Nigeria, Ethiopia, name them. This same principle of 85% stands, which simply means that the 15% which remains is what is given to what we call our government today. And that is why some people say, why are their hands not tied to embezzle? When you tie a goat, the goat has food where it is tied, but it has a limit to a jurisdiction where it cannot go. And that is why they cannot develop the private sector, they cannot develop their nation, because the condition in which they have been placed in of 15% in debt Africa way back from the beginning. Even before the independence of Africa, Africa was already heavily exploited. Africa already had treaties. Africa already has debts. So when Africa gained the so-called independence, Africa was already limping, and that is why the IMF and the World Bank came as a solution for Africa to develop herself. And that is where Africa continued to plunge herself into slavery, objective through debts, loans, and credit. I just heard of recent Cameroon just borrowed, is it 200 and something billion dollars to emerge in 2035. We all
700 and something.
So this is what we are saying, that the 15% is what I call the government. And that is why it is given to the government to repress the 85%, because their target is to exploit 85% from the African resources. So technically, when you hold a people's 85% of their natural reserve, that means that you have automatically kept 85% of its population in abject poverty. Why am I bringing this point, Mr. KUM LEONARD? Is to substantiate why people like Gaddafi were killed, people like Thomas Sankara were killed, people like P.L. Lumumba were killed by Mobutu, people like Gabriel, Steve Biko, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, name them, from both home and abroad. Why? It's because when you are dealing with a people who have lived under a particular condition for many years, which I call poverty, they lose their sense of freedom, liberty, and then they go in for what I call survival of the fittest, where they begin to fight among themselves and get the impression that you are my problem. So this is what we are trying to say, that as long as Africa is in this abject poverty situation, we will, whether we like it or not. We have given example, we cited example of other countries, Cameroon, Northwest and Southwest. All of this thing is all comes back to what we call economic power. The people do not get enough. And these are the systems. It's a system which is set in place. And until you realize that people like Gaddafi break down that system, and that is why they became a huge threat to the West. People like Thomas Sankara break down that system. That is why they were eliminated. People like Magufuli break down that system. That is why they were eliminated, because Africa was designed, even in the 60s, where the West built in militias in Africa to take out African head of state who will fight for the rights of their people. And so this is the structure in which we are living in Africa, where 85% of the people live in abject poverty, whereby if you want to get a small share of that 15%, you need to run to the government. And that's why you realize that the few economies we have in Africa lingers in the hands of very few people. So where then does it leave the 85%? That is where we have the agitation of the rise of Boko Haram, terrorism, jihadists, secessionists, and all of this. All of this is coming from the 85%. That is why Macron was talking of helping Africa to develop its private sector, because they knew that all the agitations in Africa is coming from that 85%. So if we are going to survive as a people, Mr. Leo, in Africa, we need to understand that we don't need to run these individual nations as a private state-owned company. We need to assemble ourselves together at that level and understand that Africa is one continent, and we need to build that sense of how will I call it, that sense of understanding, where it gives the Africans in the diaspora also a sense of belonging. But as Africa stands right now, the Africans in the diaspora are totally kept away from Africa. So we cannot talk of building Africa, I mean emerging Africa, and then leaving the chunks of Africans out there. So we need that alliance, Mr.
Good evening to all. I'm proud African from Du. We are the most resistant species on earth, but we became the co-authors of our misfortune because we constantly and repeatedly fuel the progress of our misleaders. But thanks to Pan-Africanists like you in the studio, the youth are gradually emancipating. Okay. Good evening to all the panelists. There is serious burning going on in Wum town. Yes, in one, I'm going to be precise because of the killing of a military officer in Wum. Today, there has been a retaliation, and houses have been burnt down in Wum towards the station section of the town. An elderly person was burnt in the house. He died from the wounds, and we are following up developments out there in Wum. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Please read my comment I sent on WhatsApp. I will not know your comments on WhatsApp. There are so many of them. Good evening. Africa needs to accept the truth of colonization, which is still around, and work to decolonization. The continent that should be the first step. Then we can move to the next step. We can't move without correcting the past. Tambi Hongi writing from Kumba. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Messages are just coming, difficult to read. Doctor, they say we need to correct the past. We have the guy who just took over power in Mali. We have another coup in Guinea. We know of what happened up not far from here in Chad. Is that how we should correct the past?
No. Yeah, but if I don't want to do it, that's a little bit tricky. But let's say this: Africa has got problems, but how do we correct the problems? If you just change, if one strong man comes out and kicks out another strong man, that's not what we need. No, it has to be about a change of systems. It has to be about a change of mindset. It's about to be about a change of how business is done. That's the bottom line. If you're going to, if one devil is going to replace another devil, it doesn't make any sense. You must, if you're going to replace, you must be better than the person you are replacing, and therefore you cannot be that useful if you are not enlightened. You have to be enlightened and know what exactly you're bringing to your people. If you don't have it in your quiver, it's useless. But when you listen to a lot of Africans talk, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, Leo.
Yeah.
If you follow our discussions on television, on social media, it's always about politics, 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 politics. And we talk for 24 hours from morning till evening, and we don't sleep. We get up the next morning, politics, 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 politics. But many of us who are talking have no clue what economics is. You can't create, they don't, if you ask someone, how do you create just one job, even for yourself, they can't. It's a huge problem. How do you develop? And when we're talking about development, development is it's a very wide spectrum. What are you going to develop? Look at the whole spectrum and pick up something. And when my colleagues here were talking, they were mentioning, they kept insisting on the private sector, which is very important. The African economy is so weak, and we think that the economy is developed by the civil service. Is false. The economy is not developed by the civil service. The economy of every nation is developed by a strong private sector. So the question we should be asking, what are these leaders, these new leaders that are coming up, what mechanisms are they going to put in place to strengthen their private sectors? And before coming into the studio, I was thinking of something, and I need to call the attention of all Africans to what we are saying. Let us look at a particular country, Zambia. The GDP of Zambia is good. When you look at it on paper, it's good. But the Zambians themselves are very poor, because though the GDP is rising, that money and the economy is in the hands of the Chinese, and it's a huge danger, a very huge danger. You know, when the Chinese, when they're doing their things, they're in their little corners. They look very cunning. It looks like they're not dangerous, but they're like some. You know, I don't want to call it. Probably somebody's going to hate me for it. But be very careful. They're not as nice as they look. They are not. And once they lay their hands on your economy, and then infiltrate your power structures, you are finished. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to take your land. They're going to take your people and enslave everybody. Be very careful with them. So we are talking about developing our economies. So our new leaders in Africa and the old ones should be looking at how they empower their children with technology and engineering, how they teach their children to create wealth. Another way to reframe the whole question is, if I were to ask you, I'm asking all those ministers in Yaoundé, tell me, what will you do to create 2 million jobs for youths in Cameroon every year? That is a question. If you can solve that problem, then you'll be able to solve the problems of Africa. How will you create 2 million jobs for Cameroonian youths every year? It's a strategy. You can talk philosophy from morning to evening, but that's the practical thing. If you cannot do it, your talking is hopeless, it's useless. And we need to leave that talking to doing. And so it doesn't matter how people come to power these days, whether the coup d'etat or whatever. The most important thing is, do you have the strategy to feed the people? When Christ is leaving the earth, he asked Peter, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, I love you, Lord. He says, feed my people, feed my sheep. If you can understand the concept of feed my people, feed my sheep, you can write a whole book on it. And also, another way to reframe it, what is emergence? How does a nation emerge? If you don't know how a nation emerges, go and check Rwanda and find out what they're doing. Go and check Namibia and find out what they're doing. Check Ghana and find out what they're doing. Then copy the good examples from Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and Israel. Africa, wake up and do these things. Just having a large population of ignorant people who are not embedded in technology is not helping us.
Okay, I'll ask the three of you just one question each for our last topic, which has to do with Russia. You've seen what Russia is doing in Central African Republic next door. We have seen them in West Africa, and seemingly they are finding their way around. What could be the motive? Power balance?
Salio, yeah. Like you said, is power balance. You know, Africans will get to believe that it is preferable to get one superpower over the other, not knowing that they are playing in the same pot soup. Those are the same persons that sit and decide how the world is run. What we call the
UN Security Council?
Yes, the United Nations Security Council is run by this. You have America, you have Russia, you have China, you have France, you have Great Britain. Those are the same nations deciding. And so if you think you want to run from China, from let's say you want to run from Great Britain and enter into the hands of China, you are not running from anybody. You are still in the same pot. You think maybe you want to bring in Russia and replace France, you are not helping. You are still doing the same thing because they have the same agenda. You see, Russia might not have influence in Africa, but it has its influence in other areas. It has the Middle East, it has part of Europe, which it controls. And the entire Europe and the UN Security Council is d'accord with that. When France has Africa, it controls Africa, every one of them knows. So trying to run, say I'm going to bring this person, is going to protect me, you are not doing anything to yourself, you are not helping. So whether it's Russia, whether it's Great Britain, whether it's China, whether it's France, they have the same policy they are implementing in Africa. And that is where our people need to get to understand. Look at it today, you see Russia is not sending their soldiers, they are sending missionaries into Africa. When you say you need their help, they are not sending their soldiers, they are sending missionaries into Africa. They have a different agenda from what you are thinking. The way Africa is right now has become the land where every European, in fact, all those big powers are fighting to get it. Every one of the ones who have a share. Because Africa has the natural resources, Africa has the human resource. And if you can get hold of it, then you can be assured of the future of your own country. So, when Africans themselves do not see this particular trick, they fall into it. And we keep on dividing ourselves. You say, I am this way because I'm now this person. We are destroying Africa. And so we do not need leaders whom, for example, you have today in Bissau, in Guinea-Bissau, an individual, Mamadi, who is married to a French woman, whom everybody knows very well, whom has been practically raised by the French, who comes, removes the individual who came and told France that we want to cut ties from you, sits back in power. Yeah, but and we believe, anyway, the thing is...
That's the democracy we're talking about.
That's the issue. So, at the end of the day, we think that the change of, whether it's Alpha Conde with Mamadi, there's going to be progress. No, very soon, those same people will rise up against Mamadi. Okay. So we need people who can come. Let me just end this one here. Let me end it. We need persons who can come in and set the country, give the country a vision where individuals can build.
Yeah, let Africans come more together for the survival of the continent. More fragmentation of Africa is still the wicked handwork of former colonial masters, and they have recruited new colonialists. The tentacles of the former colonialists are still buried deep into Africa because of the wells of riches nature has blessed the continent with. They come with the complicity of the new colonialists, and instead of digging roots, they are at night mining minerals and channeling them out through Africans who have, out of greed, refused to be citizens and have remained idiots or tribesmen at the detriment of Africa. Okay, that is a dream of Reverend Professor Tita S. Fon, writing from Yaoundé. Thank you for taking part here. Now, we are looking at Russia. Are they a better alternative to what we all as Africans have been decrying? So,
Russia cannot be a better alternative. They are just the same coin, and with two different sides, but it doesn't mean their differences inside is different in actions or minds. Russia exports, I think Europe and America and Asia gets quite much from Russia. So it is obvious that if Russia is coming into Africa, it's just the game they want to play. It is very sad that Russia cannot come to Africa to help Africans when over 16% of arms which came into Africa in 2020 came from Russia. If we are talking about Kalashnikov today, which is what is commonly referred to as AK-47, it is coming from Russia. So the person who says such a deadly arm will not be coming to solve your problems, it is obvious that he is happy when you are fighting. And we have over 18 countries to 21 countries which have certain deals with Russia. And as we speak, they are not in Africa to help. They are simply in Africa to bring the game of distraction. They want to tilt our focus towards them. This is a game which the West has. This is to continuously fragmentize or to continuously put Africa in different fractions. And so I would call on African leaders not to look at Russia as an angel, because none of these guys is an angel. The only angel we have is for us to go back and look at the way Africa was. Yes, we had states and kingdoms in Africa whom at a particular point in time fought against themselves. Howbeit, they were better off than what we see today as the Europeans. So Russia is not into Africa for any help. We see the case of Mali. The Malians sadly think that the Russian mercenary, the Wagner group, which is a private military group, which has wreaked havoc in Syria, the thousands and the millions of people who have died in Syria is under the contraction of this same group. So the Wagner group, which is what you find today in Africa, like they came to Central African Republic and I saw them celebrating. What I want the people to know is that these are no persons who have come to help you. A man cannot be coming in to help you and he's coming with war arsenals. No way that is going to help. If these same countries would be coming to Africa to help, then they should come with the kind of educational system they have in their own countries, where most of these things they bring to us are being developed. The truth is that Africa, until the day she decides to take her reserve back into her country, there is no way Africa is going to develop. It is very sad that not even our own country is not excluded, because we are talking about 85% or so of our reserve in a foreign land. So these persons understand these things, and France is buying so much from Russia. So don't see Russia into a French area, as we all know, which is quite open, and you may want to think that Russia is there to counteract the actions of the French. She does not give out her military, so to say. She gets contractors, mercenaries, and when they come into your area, they recruit your own and train them to fight against you. So it is even not the Russians whom you will see fighting in any war front. They will train by Africans and send them back to go and fight. So like the question you did pose to me, Russia is not better off than America or France. They are the same people. They have one agenda, and the agenda is to continuously underdevelop Africa. From the day the Europeans, including the Russians, decided to bring out Timbuktu, which is a place that even the Grecians, the people lived Greece, philosophers in Greece whose philosophy the West is using today, even America and even Russia, they left these areas and came to Africa to study. From the day they decided to destroy these institutions, that is the day I will tell every Africans to know that they have no good agenda for Africans.
Okay. Hello to all in the panel. I appreciate the brilliant contribution. Using Paul Kagame as a model that works better for Africa is very problematic. Gaddafi is a clear example. Strongmanship is not needed in Africa, but strong institutions. Institutions outlive people and not the other way around. Maxima, writing from Boya. Daisy from Kumba says, good evening, Mr. Leo, and to all the panelists. I don't think there has been any democracy in Cameroon, hence it's not in progress and it's not regressing. Africa should wake up from the sleep. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Want to ask your panelists who killed Gaddafi, Sankara, Lumumba, and the likes. It wasn't the Europeans, it was Africans. Africans are the ones who always rig their elections. We are the ones embezzling our riches to hide in Europe. Africans are the ones who sold each other into slavery for a bottle of whiskey. Africans are always the ones to carry out the plans of Europeans. But we don't ever like to talk about it. We rather blame the white men for doing what any reasonable human being will do. Take advantage of a stupid person. Terry is writing from Aboya. Yes, lastly to you, Andrew Natemibako, Russia, are they the new Father Christmas for Africa?
Mr. KUM LEONARD, you see, one thing people do not understand what happens in Africa is what really pains my heart. Okay. Because it is that ignorance or that absence of knowledge that ends up blaming themselves and thinking that they are the cause of the problem. It is very foolish for you to blame Africans for their problem when the originators of the problem are still in Africa. When they go to churches, they go and blame demons and devils for their problem. And they refuse to blame the presence of the multinationals in Africa. How do you blame a gun and leave the shooter? So even if the West used Africans in killing these leaders, makes the West out of the problem. It's just like a man who takes a gun and kills another man, then you go and hold the gun and say it is a gun. You need to look at the person who gave him, who handed the gun to him. It is the one you need to, the shooter is the one you need to blame. What people do not understand in Mali, this is a simple truth. Assimi Goïta was put under these conditions that he could not run Mali in the absence of any of these veto members. So he had to make a choice based on the pressure put on him by the international community. The answer here, or the question here, is what did the AU do when Assimi Goïta took over power on the behalf of the civilians? Nothing. What did the African member states are they doing to support the self-determination of the people of Mali? They did nothing. So they have left the man standing as an island to make a decision, which any of the decisions he's going to take will be at the detriment of his people. This is very important for us to understand. So he is not choosing Russia as the best choice. It is because he's left with no choice. You remember how they put sanction on him to put in a transitional government and set in a period for election. Why do they want to take? He just came out from a democratic government which did not meet the demands of his people. Why do you want to send him back to that same democracy? That is what they are doing in Mali. Because they saw in 703 tons of gold was discovered in Mali alone, which still has upset the price market of gold in the entire world. In Sudan, they discovered oil in Sudan, which is greater than that of Saudi Arabia. The people know what is in Africa, which Africans do not know. Haitians are at the border of America. Americans are running to Africa. Africans are running to Europe. Russia is running to Africa. France is running to Africa. China is running to Africa. America is running to Africa. Why Africans are running? That is what I call voluntary slavery. The Bible explains that there were 10 nations that occupied the land of Canaan. And God said to the children of Israel, he said, you shall go into a land which is not yours and you'll be enslaved. Not by the Egyptians. You will go into voluntary slavery because other multinationals have occupied your land. As long as the multinationals are in Africa, Africans will run out. Why? Because they are here to loot out the destiny, the future, and the property of the people. Now, because of poverty, Africans are running out thinking that the best is in the West, when yet the West has developed what it is, using not only Africans, also the African resources in building the economy. So this idea of all these civil conflicts, poverty in Africa is done intentionally because they want to take what is yours and then still get you to develop, use what they have taken from you and build their economy. That's how America was built, by dictators, not by democracy. And after they have built such empires, they transfer that dictatorship into a form of a system called democracy to monitor Africa, to choose which leader should be in Africa. I followed a certain interview of the ambassador of South Africa. He said presidents in Africa are handpicked by the West. How do they do it? But we are the ones still going to vote them. Poor people don't make decisions, Mr. Liu. As long as the 85% is in abject poverty, they will always help you choose the same person that you have handpicked so that it becomes their problem. But it is a condition in which you have kept the people. And that is why we are saying that until Africa will come together and then build an Africa which is neutral from the West, an Africa that is going to learn to live together by living apart. That is how self-determination is, sovereignty is all about. Living together by living apart, respecting people in their differences.
We are out of time. Dr. Nick, thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with all of us again. And even before we leave, let me continue to remind Cameroonians that peace is on the way. We're going to have our dialogue, a genuine dialogue of unity, peace, and progress. You will have your West Cameroon and East Cameroon. And let me continue to remind you that whatever we call them, governors or SDOs, sooner or later will be elected and not appointed. You will have peace. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. And I want to extend warm greetings to my family back at home and to my father, whom I think is watching right now, and to every other Cameroonian and African who will listen to us today. Thank you.
Thank you for coming too.
Thank you very much. I want to appreciate the panelists, and I want to thank all those who are watching us, and I want to particularly appreciate the staffs of Rere Habit. I think they are doing a great job, and a few persons struggled to get to me and who said they are stranded, and I want to let them know that the center in My 16 is still there for them. Those who do not have a place to go to school, we still provide a place for them, and thank them very much too for always believing in us.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you very much. Cameroonians, Africans, get past the level of blaming the gun and blame the shooter.
Okay. We also want to thank all of you who took time off to watch the program across the globe. Thank you to the production team. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.